Hello, beautiful people. My name is Emma.
And I'm MC.
And we are your hosts of the G-Forces podcast. So, this upcoming week, we have COTA, the U.S. Grand Prix. COTA stands for Circuit of the Americas, in case you didn't know. MC.
Yeah, we're going to be in Texas, which is kind of exciting.
Yes, Austin, Texas.
Yeah.
We are not. Us two
are
not going to be there.
No.
F1 is going to be there.
Yeah, the collectively. We will not be there.
I wish we could be there, but we can't.
I have gotten the ads, like, via Instagram, and they're one-day grandstand. And I was like, I said the other day to Emma, I was like, how long would the drive be? And it's like, it's ridiculous. I mean,
yeah, it would be a 12-hour drive for us.
Yeah, hard pass.
Yeah, I'm not in the mood for that.
But, yeah, so we're going to be talking, we have a driver of the week, we have a part of the week, so we'll be getting into that. Honestly, I feel like the only really big news recently out of F1 world is that Pirelli has been confirmed.
Yes,
for the next 2 years.
Today the Belgian Grand Prix is confirmed through 2025.
Did I see correctly that Lance got a written warning as well?
Yes, he did.
Yeah.
Lance Stroll got a written warning from the FIA because of the actions that
happened during Qatar. So, yeah, that's...
I think that's mainly it. Then we're going to see Daniel Ricciardo, tomorrow.
We're going to see him from a crowd of people.
Who knows? I'm gonna be the New Yorker I was born as and shove my way through the crowd.
We will be a fan. There's no,
Oh, yeah, it's not like we're actually gonna get to meet the guy.
Yeah, no, there's, Red Bull's doing these events across, they were in Chicago, now they're in Nashville, and I guess they'll be in Texas, this is, the road to...
Yeah.
To COTA, and, they're doing, street race events, so we'll be able to see Danny racing in an F1 car.
Not really racing. We're just
driving
up and down
4
and
blocks.
doing donuts.
Yeah. So.
But it is in one of the old cars, so we're gonna get to hear that engine, which is gonna be pretty cool.
Yeah. So that's our day.
Yeah.
And our weekend, really. But
yeah, we'll have already seen Red Bull by the time this episode comes out. Because yeah.
Yeah. But, yeah, so we have a driver of the week, part of the week, and a quick little shop talk going over track limits. So, let's get into Phil Hill, our driver of the week.
MC, tell us a little bit about Phil Hill.
All right, so just before we get into it, my sources for Driver of the Week this week was Formula One Drivers Hall of Fame, great resource, philhill.com. I'm not sure who it's maintained by, but it was there, so got some information from that. And then motorsport.com has an incredible article about Phil Hill, his racing career, lots of really in-depth details about the races, so that's kind of where I got all my information. So let's get into Phil Hill. Born on April 20th, 1927 in Miami, Florida, he is the first American F1 champion, big deal. Sort of, I don't know, he's been my favorite driver that I have looked into.
Yeah.
The older drivers, I find their careers are crazy.
Well, and the reason why we decided that MC was going to do Phil Hill this week was because COTA, the racetrack, is only 10 years old,
15
maybe?
years old.
And so a lot of the winners from that track are going to be people that we know, and we always, at least at this beginning portion of the podcast, we like to look into the people that we've never heard of before. So Phil was the first only American champion, right?
Yeah, I believe so. Yes. I can't think.
I don't get the vibe that any other Americans have won, to be honest.
Well, if there is,
sorry, we forgot about you.
Yeah, but so Phil was born in Miami, Florida, and then he was raised in Santa Monica. According to Drivers Hall of Fame, when he was 12, his aunt gifted him a Model T Ford. Apparently, he was constantly working on it, and this is the beginning of his love of cars as well as car restoration. So, just like quick assumption, 1927 he's born, he's 12, it's 1939. Apparently, his aunt's chauffeur taught him how to drive, so
They rich.
yeah, I mean, especially since, like, think 1930s, it's Depression era.
1939. Is the U.S. in World War II yet?
No, not until 41.
Yeah.
But, yeah, so just thought it was really interesting that he was just gifted this Model T Ford, this, like, ancient car, and started just tinkering on it. So that's kind of where the beginning of his love for cars started. From 1945 to 1947, he was studying at the University of Southern California, focusing on business administration, but apparently he just got bored and decided to leave to pursue cars and racing. During these early years, he would buy cars and race them, seeing success. He was a car mechanic in an LA garage, and the owner of the garage was an amateur racer. And I think similar to what we saw with Jim Clark during this time, because they raced around the same years, I think you just had, like, rich friends who had fancy cars that would kind of just throw you in, and you would race them. Unfortunately, he was someone who was riddled with constant worry going as far back as his childhood. Apparently, he was just a little bit of an introverted kid. He was constantly just, like, his anxiety was a constant stressor that you would see throughout all of his career. And he would worry in these early years so much that he gave himself stomach ulcers and had to take 10 months off.
Oh my goodness.
I think it was F1 said, with the help of tranquilizers, he was able to get through this, and I was like, man, crazy time.
What was going on back then?
The 40s and the 50s, like, regulations were not.
Yeah.
Even with these complications, stomach ulcers, anxieties, worries, the 50s were a huge success for him in the U.S. scene, and he became known as, like, the greatest American motor driver. 1955 saw him join Ferrari's endurance team for Le Mans that year. In his career, he would go on to win Le Mans 3 times, all with the same co-driver. Le Mans in 1955, unfortunately, saw one of, if not the worst motorsport crash ever seen, killing 83 spectators, the driver Pierre Levesque, and injuring more than 120 other spectators.
What happened?
I honestly, there's another car crash that I read, like, what happened between the cars. It was later on during his championship year. I honestly cannot remember what happened, but
it might not have a lot of info on it because of how horrible it was.
I think they have info, I just didn't, like, dive super deep into it.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, not out of disrespect, but just because, you know, there's so much more information.
Yeah.
But yeah, so this was, like, a huge thing. This crash was one that stuck with multiple drivers, including Jim Clark, who had been there, and Phil Hill. Just, like, this time of sport, at least from all that I've done, now I don't know comparisons, I'm sure there's data out there, but it seems like the fatality rate was incredibly high.
Yeah.
And so Phil, with that anxiety that he has, you know, he is constantly like, is this worth dying for?
Yeah.
Which I think is something that, you know, drivers still face today, but safety regulations, you know,
are so different today.
So different. The cars themselves are so different. His goal was to join the Ferrari F1 team. So now remember, he was on the endurance team. His goal was to join the F1 team. But Enzo Ferrari did not see him as an F1 driver. Him and Enzo Ferrari, from the quotes and the comments that Phil Hill, after his time at Ferrari, made, it did not seem like it was a healthy, happy relationship.
Yikes.
I think Enzo Ferrari saw Phil Hill as a good driver, but as a safe driver. And I think Ferrari was looking for risk takers.
Okay. This was the same time that I might be jumping ahead in years or back in years. This is around the same time that Ascari was racing for Ferrari F1, right?
Alberto Ascari, I believe, died in 55.
Okay.
So I have to look back at my notes.
He just
But
passed.
it just passed. And, like, Ferrari, I hate to say it, at this time was, like, riddled with just, like, driver deaths.
Yeah.
Like, it's crazy.
Yeah.
So, 1957 saw Phil, 1955, really bad crash. His goal is to join Ferrari. You know, in this time, he's doing endurance races. 1957 saw Phil actually go to win his first Le Mans, which was super exciting. And then in 1958, we finally saw Phil's promotion to F1. With this frustration from Ferrari, Maserati approached him, so he first joined with Maserati, which I think added to the, like, already stressed relationship between Ferrari. And then I think he only did one race with Maserati because throughout multiple races, Ferrari at this point had 4 drivers on their team. They lost 2 of the drivers through severe accidents.
How did they have 4?
I don't know. I have to look back at the
The rules,
regulations.
yeah,
like you're asking
the rules
me,
make no sense.
The rules change
time.
every
That's
year
true.
in this sport. You're asking
That's
me
true.
for 1958 regulations and team stats.
Yes. Well,
I'm
because
focused on one guy today.
just a sidebar, because the rules change every single year. When the season is over, we are likely going to take some time to, like, we're going to have a few episodes on, like, what is the World Endurance Championship? Like, what is IndyCar? And then also go over, like, in F1 in the 1950s, how many teams were there actually and how many cars could actually be on the grid and all that stuff.
Yeah, we're going to do a historic deep dive.
Yeah. Anyways, back
to
Phil Hill.
Until then, I don't know how Ferrari had him. But,
Okay.
Ferrari approached him and was like, hey, we're down, and asked Phil to join. Phil finally joined Ferrari for the 1958 Italian Grand Prix, placing the fastest lap and 7th overall. He ended up sticking with Ferrari and finally saw his first win in 1960 during the Italian Grand Prix. This is the first, not F1, but just like Grand Prix victory for an American since 1921. So 39 years. When Jimmy Murphy won Le Mans, there was like 2 websites said this, but
he won Le Mans also, I thought.
But I don't know if Le Mans was deemed a Grand Prix at that point.
Oh, okay. So for the Le Mans that he won was 24 hours Le Mans, and then there might have been a Le Mans Grand Prix.
Yeah.
Okay, makes sense.
Yeah. We're throwing it back, like 1921. Yeah. Like
makes
that
sense.
is. So that was a really big deal. Many of the articles that I was reading through discuss the continued anxiety that he has. Before a lot of the starts, he was known to pace and chain smoke and just, like, constantly be stressed around the car. But the second he started, he was calm and collected. He was even well known for how he drove on tough circuits like Spa and the German course. I have to look it up.
Is it Hockenheim?
No.
Are you talking about the Austrian course, Nürburgring?
Yes, it's the Austrian course.
F1's not allowed to race there anymore.
Yeah, well, apparently he was great. Apparently
he was great.
Apparently he loved racing in the rain as well. Like, he compared it to being like a little kid looking out your parents' window, which is ironic because you're driving in a ridiculous car.
Yeah.
It's the farthest thing from a leisurely child to drive. 1961 saw the V6 Sharknose Ferrari 156S, 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 I don't know.
It doesn't matter.
It's a beautiful car. Look it up. Being the biggest competition on the grid, this season was super tight in terms of points between him and his teammate Wolfgang von Trips. They went into the Italian GP that year fighting for the championship title. So it was like first, second, like they were neck and neck with points. Hill started the race in fourth on the grid, but once the race started, he was able to pull up to first. Unfortunately, further back, this was a race that I've talked about prior with Jim Clark, or another driver of the day, or of the week. Unfortunately, further back, Von Trips spun out after his left rear tire rubbed with Jim Clark's right front tire. Sadly, Von Trips ultimately perished along with 14 spectators. Now, something that kind of blew my mind but wasn't surprising was that at this point in time, when these crashes happened, they didn't stop the race. So Phil Hill actually drove past them, like, cleaning up, like, the carnage of this crash, like, to finish. Like, the safety regulations...
I guess that's not all that surprising, because I think virtual safety cars only became a thing after Jules Bianchi's death.
But it's just, like, it's crazy that this amount of loss of life, like, they have to just continue.
Yeah.
That, like, but then it's, like, they don't have the radio communicate. Like, we're talking...
Yeah, I was going to say, do they even have the ability to radio into their team? And
yeah,
ask what's
how
going
do you...
on?
Besides flags, I guess, how do you communicate? Because of this... Hill went on to win the Italian Grand Prix and ultimately won the Drivers' Championship that year, having one more point than his former teammate, or his late teammate Von
I do
Trips.
feel like, I don't know if I'm just reading into it, but I feel like there's been so many times where these drivers win the overall Drivers' Championship, like, after winning or, like, doing decently in a race, that is, like, horrific. Like, it always ends up happening on, like, a horrific weekend.
Yeah, I mean, it seemed like this time in F1 history, it seemed like almost every weekend someone walked away. Hurt, injured, dead. or unfortunately, killed. Yeah. And I think that's something, like, the sport has changed so much.
Yeah.
I mean, just the spectator death. I mean, in the years that he's driving, it's over 100 spectators have passed.
Yeah.
Phil didn't go to celebrate, obviously, and was a pallbearer with Von Tripp's funeral, and was quoted stating, "I never in my life experienced anything so profoundly mournful." So, you know, the peak of his career, the peak of an F1 driver's career is just, unfortunately, this bittersweet experience where someone who, even if it's a teammate, like,
you're still close to your teammate.
So, 1962 was expected to be a great season after this win, but what seemed like an internal drama at Ferrari, along with a car that was just not winning, a lot of other teams seemed to be able to catch up. He eventually left Ferrari at the end of the 62 season, so a year after that championship with them. Motorsports.com had a super interesting quote, and I tried to see if I could verify it by finding it elsewhere. It's motorsports.com. I'm going to assume that they've done the heavy lifting for that, but Phil Hill was quoted saying, "Enzo Ferrari never understood me. I wasn't his type, not super gung-ho enough to suit him. A lot of fine drivers died racing for him, and he always favored the man who would take that extra risk in a live-or-die situation. I won a lot of races for him, which is why he kept me around, but I was never his kind of driver. I wasn't willing to die for Enzo Ferrari. I wasn't willing to be another one of his sacrifices."
Whoa.
Yeah, I thought that was just, like, yeah.
I think that says a lot.
I think it
Ferrari.
speaks volumes about what was happening. I think,
I mean, a culture is built from the ground up. I think, yeah.
Yeah, it's just, I don't know. I just thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
I think it was interesting to kind of point out at this time, you know, especially with the fact that, you know, Phil Hill came onto this team after the deaths of 2 Ferrari drivers.
Yeah.
You know, we saw Alberto Ascari, another Ferrari driver,
die.
Yeah, I just thought it was really interesting, the risk that
was expected.
Not just from the drivers themselves, but from the owner-creator of this driving empire. So, obviously, it's one person's opinion and quote, but I don't know, I thought it was powerful.
Yeah,
thought it said a lot. So, 1963 saw him join the ATS team. That wasn't very successful. I think ATS was just a team of people who had left Ferrari and kind of put their own team together, but it didn't see the success. 1964 saw him switch to Cooper, which also wasn't successful.
Oh.
And then I think he kind of ended, that was kind of the end of his F1 full driving. 1965 he drove for McLaren in the Tasman series, which is a racing competition in Australia and New Zealand back then. And then he did there was a bunch of drivers, I think it's called Grand Prix. It's a 1966 film about F1 drivers, and at that time they actually had Phil Hill get into a car and they strapped a camera to the car, and then he drove around, and it was him and a few others. And that was kind of it. He ended up coming back to the States, racing cars here, but he never went back to F1. Post-racing, in the 70s, he started a family, a really successful car restoration business, and he had a huge love for music. So music, opera, all things like that became a big part of his life. Unfortunately, after a long battle with Parkinson's, Phil Hill passed on August 28th, 2008. And yeah, he was just, some of the quotes I was reading that he said about driving an F1, just as someone who does have a lot of deep-rooted anxiety, just socially, and having that competition when we were rowing in high school and college, to know that even on that professional level there's that guy pacing, granted, I'm not chain smoking, but it just seemed like he had the most human reaction to this crazy sport.
Well, and even today, I feel like we've seen drivers get extremely anxious because of crashes that they may have had, and it makes them way more cautious when they're driving, and their teams will get frustrated with it, but it's there are reasons why people are anxious about these things. So.
Yeah, and you saw it with Phil, and you saw it with our Prix driver, Jim Clark, where... And I'm sure it's the same with every single driver that has witnessed something horrific on the field. These things are carried with them for the rest of their life, for every single time they get into a car. And I think you really saw that in the safe driving that Phil Hill attempted. And
I mean, really, the safety regulations only started to change after Senna died.
Yeah. I read somewhere, too, that after Von Tripp's passed, I think it was, Switzerland or something, some country banned...
Racing?
Racing, yeah.
Wow.
I mean, I think the numbers speak for themselves. It was unfortunately a risky time, but that is our driver of the week. I think he's my favorite so far that I've researched. Incredible career.
I like hearing about, his afterlife and, hearing what he did after racing.
Yeah. He had a super successful car restoration. He loved restoring, working on cars. And that was something that you saw him...
He started as a car mechanic.
And he started even before that, as a kid, playing around with his Model T Ford. Yeah. But, yeah, awesome driver, and really happy I did him this week.
Awesome.
So, yeah.
Well, now I'm going to get into the part of the week. So, this week I am going to be talking about tires. So, I know in the past, our very first Shop Talk episode, I think it was our second episode ever.
I think it was our F1 101.
Yeah, we talked about tires, but we didn't get into the actual, details of the tires, and given that at the Qatar Grand Prix, tires were one of the main focuses of the weekend, I wanted to go over tires this week. So, just to reiterate, the tire manufacturer is Pirelli at the moment. There's been several different tire manufacturers. If you watch races from like the early 2000s, I think Bridgestone was the tire manufacturer. And there's just been there was literally what they coined a tire war at one point. Mm-hmm. But now it's Pirelli, and Pirelli's contract was just extended. So, in 2022, there was technical changes. So, now the tires are 18-inch tires to make them more similar to everyday tires, so that the technology from everyday tires can be transferred to F1 tires and vice versa. And just so you know, for the 2023 season, there are 6 slicked compounds. From hardest to softest, it's C0, C1, C2, C3, C4, and C5. And then there are wet tires and intermediate tires. And those ones, the wet and the intermediates, you will actually see a tread on them. Mm-hmm. On the slick tires, to our eyes, you can't see anything. From what I was understanding, there is something there.
Okay, from, like, a television point of view, like, from...
No, like, even, like, our eyes looking at... if I had the tire in my hand right now, we wouldn't be able to notice.
But on, like, a microscopic level.
Yeah.
Okay, but it's still smooth.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know.
So, watching the races, and you see the slick tires... I've always been confused. Yeah, there's downforce with the cars, but I've always been confused. How the heck are they driving on the road? Doesn't make any sense to me. You don't have any grip. Apparently they do.
I think for me, it was always, like, why would they put them on so, like, when they look so slick?
Yeah.
Like, why wouldn't they do something like sand them down? Which I know, like, someone's gonna, like, be, like, freaking out that I'm saying, but, like, why wouldn't they want, like, texture? Like, when you get a new pair of heels, you gotta, like, scratch them.
Yeah.
So you don't friggin' kill yourself.
I'm gonna get there. The difference between soft and a hard tire is quite literally, it is physically softer rubber.
Okay.
And so whenever somebody would just say, like, oh, that's the soft tire, or, like, that's the medium tire, I'd be like, what makes the soft tire a soft tire compared to the medium tire? It's just because the rubber is physically softer and not as, it's like stiff, basically.
Is it more pliable?
Yes.
But not in, like, a Play-Doh. Like, it's not.
Yes, it is.
Okay. But it's obviously, it would
It's
fall
not
apart.
Play-Doh. So the soft compound we typically hear about during qualifying most of the time. Those will offer the most amount of grip for a short period of time, making them ideal for qualifying runs, like a 1 lap, 2 lap, maybe the last few laps of a race. And that's usually the tire that you will get your fastest lap of the race on, which is why it's used for qualifying. And so, to get into the actual, like, nitty-gritty of F1 tires, they are much, like, when you cut it open, they're much thinner than our regular everyday tires, which makes sense because they're not having to deal with, like, the potholes and, like, crap on the ground that we have to deal with on our streets.
They're not dealing with speed bumps.
I would hope
tree
that
branches.
I would hope that before a street race, they bring in street cleaners and clean the streets off. Because if not, I don't know how they're driving on it then. So, for the softer compound, the deeper into the grooves of the track the tire can go as the compound deforms to the mold to the track's surface. So, to break that down into better language, I'm reading what I got off of the website. The soft tires, as they start to heat up, because they're a softer rubber, they're able to heat up faster than a harder rubber.
Yeah.
And when they get hotter, they actually form, like, mold to the track.
Okay.
so it's almost like sticky to the track, and the grooves, like any bumps or whatever that's in the track, that actually creates like micro tears in, what's the actual word? It's called shears. That's the word. It creates shears into the tires, so that literally becomes the traction.
The traction that they need.
Yeah.
Valid.
And so, like I said before, as the tire goes deeper into the groove, it generates more surface area, like how it's getting warmer, and this allows more force to be applied through the rubbers, so the downforce is going into the tires as well, basically, and sticking it to the ground because the rubber is molded to the track.
Okay.
And so that's why the soft tires have the best grip, but because they are so hot and they shear away the fastest, that's why you can only use them for such a short period of time. And so that's why if you want a quick tire, but it's gonna last you a little bit longer, that's why people will go for the mediums for a lot of the race. Hards are, honestly, it just looks like they're like cold, nothing's doing anything.
Like they're just, yeah.
Like you're slippery.
Which is why they're probably always saying, which makes it more obvious right now, is why they're like, for Qatar, they were constantly saying like the hards are gonna take so much longer to warm up.
Yeah.
Because they're denser rubber.
Yeah.
They're not able to, like, there's probably more to warm up. Yeah. Valid.
Well, and that's why at hotter tracks, like in Qatar, they brought the Pirelli brought the 3 hardest tires there, because if they brought like the 3 softest tires there, they wouldn't have been able to last the race.
Yeah.
Because the track would have been so hot that the tires would have shredded away immediately.
And by 3 hardest, do you mean that scale of like the
C0 to C6. So Pirelli brought the C0, C1, and C2 because those are the hardest. So C2 was the soft, C1 was the medium, and C0 was the hard.
Wow.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't they?
Just explain that?
Or why wouldn't they have 0 as the softest?
I know.
I don't know. Maybe I'm like 5.
It irritates me too.
Like it's so backwards.
So there are also layers in the tire, obviously, and each layer does a certain thing. It's not like it's like actively doing it, but each layer has a specific purpose. And the softer compound tire allows more movement between these layers, causing a higher level of tire distortion, in turn generating a large amount of movement between the layers of the compound. So the molecules are rubbing together rapidly, and their chemical bonds are stretched and compressed. Hold on, let me switch my page. I can't remember.
Science.
Yes, causing heat to generate much faster, which is why they're able to heat up faster.
Science.
And also why it creates more grip, but also at the same time, why it gets shredded way faster.
Yeah. I mean, it all makes sense.
Yeah,
Like,
now that I think about it, and I have this explanation, I'm like, wow, why didn't I just think of that on my own? But it makes a lot more sense now.
Yeah, and I feel like the way they've named it is, it's like a duh moment.
Yeah.
It's like, no shit. Like, that's obvious.
Yeah.
But no one
when you sit down and you watch a race, they're just like, oh, this is the soft, medium, and hard tire. Okay, is that? What makes a soft tire soft and a hard tire hard?
But that's what our platform.
Yeah, that's what we're here for. Now that we know, you know.
Yeah. The more you know.
And I got this information from this website in the UK called suspensionsecrets.co.uk, which I think that it's just a car site where they talk about some really fancy cars.
There's an incredible amount of car sites.
Yeah, it's a lot.
There's a lot of car blogs.
Yeah, there are.
Hey,
I mean, I guess we're kind of one of them at the same time. We can't shame that. So yeah, that is my explanation on tires and kind of how they actually work, which makes a lot more sense now. And now we can go into our Grand Prix weekends and not be confused about tires. And now it makes a lot more sense why Pirelli was like, we should put a track limit on these tires, because if they were tearing that quickly...
Yeah, they would have been falling apart.
Yeah.
There would have been no tire left.
So now I get it. I am so frustrated that the drivers had a hard time with... Because it was basically qualifying lap after lap after lap in the actual race. But also your tires wouldn't have made it through the race.
Yeah.
So I get it.
Yeah. I think it's just... And it also is interesting because... I'm curious. The tires are this, like, secret thing. Like, Pirelli
They're
has
very
this
top secret.
like, formula for the rubber and whatever. But I wonder if, like, a weekend, like, Qatar also freaked out Pirelli the way it did, like, the drivers with the physical toll it took. If it freaked out Pirelli because they were like, this is the hardest we have.
Yeah.
Like, we can't... And I'm sure they're working on, like, developing types of tires that are even harder.
Yeah.
But it's like, what do you do?
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah.
Like, you're limited.
Yeah.
Like, the hotter the freaking track gets, you're SOL.
Especially with climate change, yeah.
Oh, that's a whole other conversation.
I know, I'm just saying, you have places like Qatar that are already really hot.
They're so hot.
And possibly might get even hotter, so
yeah.
You're going to need an even harder tire. Come on, Pirelli.
Work on it. We'll send you notes.
Yeah.
With tires, it kind of segues into our shop talk because your tires can go over this and it can affect you.
Track limits,
so
people.
We're going over track limits today.
Like we said, we're going to be talking about the... What did I just say? Or track limits, people. We're going to be talking about the track limits
I was
this week.
waiting for you to do... What are we talking about this week?
No, I need to switch up our transitions. The reason why our transitions sound the same every single time we have a different section of what we're talking about is because our camera stops filming after about 22 minutes. So we have to film for 20 minutes and then stop and then start again. And so we break everything up into these tiny little segments. So if you ever hear us go like, now let's get into this, it's because I have to get up, walk away from our little table, turn the stop recording, and then start recording again.
Emma will occasionally, I will talk on for too long, shocker, and Emma will, if like the camera's flashing, because I'm not paying attention, she'll like pinch me or like make
I'll
a
hit
face,
her under the table.
and she'll be like, and I'll be like, okay, gotta wrap it up.
Yeah. Anyways, our track
know.
limits.
All right, so track limits are the boundary between the racetrack and being off the circuit. Hence the name.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
Track limits.
That's an amazing description.
Yeah, so it is around most of the course, it's literally the white line.
Yeah.
It is, there's drawing inside of the lines and drawing outside of the lines. And if you hit track limits, you're outside of the lines.
It's like just driving not
on a road. Yeah, being on the highway. You're on the highway, you're in the ditch.
You're in the ditch. I was going to say you're in the shoulder. In the ditch.
I don't know.
Oh my god.
It's been a long day.
Okay. So yeah, that's basically what track limits are. The reason why we're talking about it is because of how hectic it was in Qatar.
It was the buzzword.
Yeah.
It was the buzzword.
Yeah.
So
I think almost every driver, the majority of them had track limits problems.
Yeah. So just some like quick little things that I think we all saw that was affecting the race in terms of times and placement was if you go outside of track limits, your lap time is deleted.
In qualifying.
Because essentially, if you go over track limits, if you cut a corner, it's the assumption of you've made an advantage, you've cut time. So your time gets deleted.
Only when I did see one thing. They'll really only do that, though, if you're going over track limits gives you an advantage. So, like, say
you cut a whole corner.
Yeah, say you slide off the track and you skirt on back onto the track and you continue your fast lap for some psychotic reason. That lap would probably still count because you didn't, like, cut a corner or, like, go over the track limits because it would give you a better line. You just spun off the track.
Well, and to be more specific, track limits it's not, oh, you went into that lane. It's not like one tire outside means you're out of track.
All 4 tires.
All 4
over
tires
the line.
have to be over that white line. So like if you'll see a lot of times with certain corners, they'll have only 2 tires outside, doesn't count. But a race, track limits is a little bit different.
Yes.
Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so the FIA is watching everyone basically during the race to see track limits issues, and sometimes in some races it might change depending on the race, but for the most part, if you go over the track limits 2 times, you will get warnings. And then on your 3rd time going over the track limit, you will be shown a black and white flag to let you know that if you do it one more time, you will be given a 5-second time penalty. And if you do it that 4th time, then you will be given a 5-second penalty. And usually that penalty is served when you go in for a pit stop. Now, when those penalties are served, your pit crew cannot have any hands on the car, and you just have to sit there for the 5 seconds, and then they can start working on the car. I think in the past they were like allowed to start working on it during the 5-second penalty, which is a little shady, I feel like.
Yeah, I mean, it's supposed to be like 5 seconds that are like if there's
it's a penalty.
You can't drive, you can't be worked on.
Yeah.
It is. We have seen some good examples, not good because they're a penalty, but there have been really good pit crew examples of this in the past few races.
They'll stop the car. They'll put on like the cart thing.
You'll see everyone freeze. Everyone is frozen in
Their
place.
hands are in position, ready to go,
but they're frozen.
Yeah. So that's what happens during an actual race, and you can get those as many times as possible. I think Esteban Ocon got like 6 of them. Yeah, 6 because he had 30 seconds of time penalties in Austria 2023.
Checo had
15 seconds, I think.
Yeah.
So that's 3 that he had.
Pierre had a few.
Yeah, and some race courses are worse than others with it.
Yeah.
So, like, Qatar was very difficult for people to stay on the track because of certain turns.
Well, and we did see a revision of track limits.
Yeah.
So they repainted lines. So things are not always set in stone when it comes to track limits.
Yeah.
But we do see them more often on some courses and not really.
I think it's also become a bit more relevant over the last few years with the regulation changes and the cars being wider. And so not as many cars can fit on the track across. And as well, like, your line might be slightly different than it would have in a smaller car.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, but something that you will probably see
at least once every race, I feel like.
Yeah, not necessarily a penalty, but track limits will be brought up.
Yeah, definitely.
That's our shop talk.
Yeah.
I don't really have anything else this week.
I think that's really everything, honestly.
Yeah, we did hot news in the beginning, and I feel like it's just a quiet weekend.
Yeah, with the weekend off from racing, I feel like a lot of the drivers are probably going to get to Texas early.
Yeah.
I can see them getting there just because of the time change, and then also, like, get adjusted to the heat of Texas.
I'm just happy it's at a normal time.
Yeah.
Unlike Vegas.
Yes. Very
much. Which Vegas makes no sense.
It really doesn't make any sense.
Ugh.
So.
Well, we will talk to you guys soon.
Yeah. All right. Bye, guys.
Bye.